All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And I know it's a really odd year for teachers, so we so appreciate you continuing to join us live and on YouTube as we celebrate and showcase such amazing people and places from around the globe. Now, May, as many of you will know from our relentless marketing, is our big biodiversity month. We are doing our Global Biodiversity Festival on the third weekend of May, the biggest thing we've ever done. All month long, we are running Backyard Bio, the largest citizen science global nature campaign that we've ever done, and one of the largest in the world ever, which is pretty exciting. So we're getting a jump start on that. We are going to head out to Austria, all the way across the pond for us North American students, to meet up with Jennifer Colbourne. So she is a PhD researcher studying cockatoos there. She has a past history studying raccoons, our trash bandits here in Toronto, and she is going to walk through with us today sort of the marvels of urban biodiversity, some really, really cool, very intelligent animals and what they get up to on a day-by-day basis. So I'm very excited. Jennifer's an old friend of mine. It's been a long time since I've had the chance to partner with her on anything. So you guys are in for a real treat today. Thank you so much for joining us around the world. And without further ado, Jennifer, take us away, and thank you so much for joining.
Hi, thanks, Jesse. It's been so great to see you again. Brings me back to my days back in Toronto. We had a lot of fun. So as Jesse mentioned, I'm a doctoral student. And for some of you who aren't familiar with that, I just thought I would quickly recap what that is. So as most of you are familiar with your own education, when you're a kid, you go to elementary school. And if your system has one, then you would go to a middle school. And then after that, you go to secondary school. Well, when you decide to go to university, it's a kind of a similar system. So you start off by going to school and you can do your bachelor's degree. And a lot of people stop there. But if you're really enthusiastic, you can do something called a master's degree. And that takes a couple years. And if you're really, really, really crazy and you just love research and being in school, then you're me and you do what's called a doctoral degree. And that's also referred to as doing your PhD. And the one cool thing about it is that at the end, people have to call you doctor. Now, you're not like a medical doctor, but like a scientist kind of doctor. But on the other side, you basically have to do enough research that you can write a small book. So it's a lot of work. So I did my master's research with raccoons, and this was in Toronto. And that's actually how I met your host, Jesse. And currently for my research, I'm studying cockatoos, and I'm doing that in Austria and a little bit in the United Kingdom, and that's over in Europe. So right now it's about 4 p.m. my time. So how are these two species related? They seem pretty different, right? Well, to start with, I want to talk about the difference between generalists and specialists. So you have an animal, and that animal needs to get food. And that's a major thing about animals in biology, is how they get food, because that's really important. That's how they survive. That's how they go on and find a mate and to have babies. And you have two options as an animal. You can think of it maybe as like being a superhero. You can do one thing really, really well, or you can do lots of things okay. So you can just run really, really, really fast, but you can't do anything else. Or you can be kind of good at running and kind of good at fishing and kind of good at, I don't know, hiding. Lots of different things you can do. So an example of an extreme example of a specialist is a panda bear. Pandas eat bamboo. That's actually pretty much all pandas do. They eat bamboo. Everything about a panda is made for bamboo. Their teeth, their digestion, they are bamboo eaters. And if you go to the zoo, that's literally all you're going to see. So if you have a if you have a panda show up at the city, he's going to be like, yo, where's the bamboo at? What am I supposed to eat? There's literally nothing here that I can eat. And that's why it's really important that for animals like a panda that can only survive in one habitat, you have to do things like keep the bamboo forests. But then we have the other extreme. We have the raccoon, which some of you may have heard the nickname, the trash panda. And although they might look a teeny bit like pandas, they are nothing like pandas because they can really easily access and eat things like nuts and different fruits They love corn. They love to steal that from the farmers' fields. The farmers don't like that so much. They can fish and eat all sorts of things like crabs and seafood. And oh yeah, they also really enjoy fast food. So in a lot of ways, they're like humans. They can eat meat things and they can eat vegetable things. So they're what we call an omnivore, which some of you may be familiar with that term. And so what this means is that these animals are really excited by a place where all these different foods can be found. Your garbage bin. They don't mind that it's half eaten. They're really excited because, hey, they hardly have to do anything. They just have to open the bin and they have a buffet. And that means raccoons love being in our cities. And we find them everywhere, especially in cities in North America like Toronto. We will discover them stuck in storm grates. Some of them even break into the library, probably to get a good book. I don't know if you heard about this famous raccoon, but he climbed a high rise and got stuck there, but maybe he was just enjoying the view. They like to break into kitchens just to have a piece of toast. And, you know, they are bandits, so they're known to break into banks and to steal some donuts from Tim Hortons, because why not? And they can even be found commuting on the subway. Now, just a side note, but I'm wondering if any of you can tell if there's something wrong with this picture. Maybe just think a second. What could be wrong with this picture? The problem is that these women, they're really amused by the raccoon. They think it's funny, so they're just sitting there and laughing. But the reality is they're a little close to that raccoon. You really should back away. So for you kids that are familiar with superhero movies, you probably know that raccoons are armed and dangerous. They have claws and they have teeth, and if they're scared, they might not be afraid to use them. So it's better to give them some space. But more importantly, they also carry a lot of diseases. And I don't know this whole COVID-19 thing, but personally, I'm not a fan of diseases. One disease that's special to them can be found in their poop, and it's called the raccoon roundworm. And yeah, the worms go inside your body. So you really don't want that. And another thing that they carry is rabies, and rabies is very serious. So if you ever get bit or scratched by a raccoon, or for that matter, even skunks, you need to go to the doctor as soon as possible. Anyways, I digress. So raccoons, they're a big fan of garbage. Well, it turns out that we're not a huge fan of having them in our garbage bins. So in the city of Toronto, this has especially been a problem because these raccoons, they have so many garbage bins that they can break into. And being raccoons, they like to make a big old mess. For some of you who've lived in the city, you might be familiar with this. So Toronto residents had a problem with this. So the city introduced a new bin. And my supervisor at the time for my master's degree, Dr. Suzanne McDonald, she tested these new raccoon-proof bins. So what she did is she put an entire roast chicken inside the bin, and then she shut it with the lock. Now, the thing about these locks is that they're supposed to be raccoon-proof because they require an amount of pressure and to turn in a way that's actually impossible for raccoons. And so she set up all these night cameras and saw whether they could get inside. And as you can see, they didn't have much luck. But what's interesting is that she said they were incredibly persistent. Even though they couldn't get in the bin, they kept coming back and they kept coming back, and they even get the bins over. They kept trying. She said she had a single raccoon come back over 6 hours, I believe. But in the end, the city won. However, I will tell you something that's a little funny, which is that there is a rumor that they can get in some of the bins. And even though it's still impossible for them to undo the lock, what they've done is the raccoons keep knocking the bins until the lock mechanism breaks. And then the humans aren't closing it properly and they can get in. But this is what I'm told. Hopefully not too many raccoons have figured that out yet. So the problem with having raccoons in our garbage bins is that they're eating lots of things they weren't meant to eat. And they get very big and they get very stuck. And another thing is that when raccoons get very, very big, their body says, hey, you know what? We should have more baby raccoons because we could easily feed more baby raccoons. So they have more and more kits than they ever would have in the wild. And that is a bit of a problem because even though they're very cute, we really don't want our cities to be taken over and look like the raccoon apocalypse. So it's really good if they don't eat our garbage. As you can see, they can take care of themselves. They have lots of different things that they can eat. So don't feed the raccoons. They'll figure it out. Let's not have the raccoon apocalypse. So how in the world does this relate to cockatoos? So raccoons belong in North America, Canada and the United States mostly, whereas cockatoos are a type of parrot. And yes, you're thinking the big birds that talk. Cockatoos don't talk a lot, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, they're a type of parrot and they live in Australia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, that area. And there's all sorts of different kinds. They come in all different sizes and different colors. And one of the small ones that you'll see, Goffin's cockatoo, that's a Corella, and that's the one that I currently have been working with. So I work with the Goffin's cockatoo in our lab in Austria, and they have a giant aviary where they can fly around and play, and they have lots of toys and people, students, and birds to hang out with, and they have a pretty good life. And we give them the option to solve puzzles for us, so we can learn more about their puzzle-solving abilities and other things. So we feed them very well, and just like the raccoons, they eat a lot of different foods. So I'm just going to ask everyone, I'm going to name a food that we feed our cockatoos, and if it's a food that you've ever had in your life, you've tried it, put up your hand, and if it's a food that you really like, then wave your hand back and forth, okay? Even if you're just on a webcam and you're not with the rest of your class, everyone can see you. We'll pretend we can all see each other. So the first one, as you can see in the picture, cherries. Who's had cherries before? And in the next one, they're having a noodle. They love pasta. It's a special treat. And in the summer, corn. They make a big mess of corn. What about watermelon? I love watermelon. Potatoes? Carrots, apples, yogurt, pecan nuts, cashews, and one last one, sunflower seeds. So as you see, our birds are very spoiled. They have a special diet created for them, and they eat other things I haven't mentioned, like eggs and cauliflower and bananas. They have a great life. And the ones in the wild, they also can eat lots of different foods, and they also help themselves to stuff we don't tend to feed them, like, I don't know, like bugs and grass roots and all sorts of different herbs and whatever they can find. So in that way, they're actually a lot like raccoons. And this scene might seem pretty familiar. So that's a large cockatoo. That's a sulfur-crested cockatoo in Australia. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but that's a cinder block. So a big, heavy stone that a person has used to try and keep their garbage can closed. And this cockatoo is pushing it. And that thing probably weighs 2 or 3 times more than the cockatoo because they're very light so they can fly. But that doesn't stop the cockatoo. And if you can imagine taking away a 2 or 3 times the weight of used stone just so you can have dinner. But he succeeds pretty quickly. So in Australia, just like in Toronto, people have issues with cockatoos breaking into garbage bins. And like raccoons, they like to make a big mess. Although, unlike raccoons, cockatoos are very, very loud. I don't know why people want them as pets. They can scream louder than chainsaws. They can actually scream at a decibel louder than, I think it was a plane taking off, the biggest ones, the umbrellas. They're very deafening, so that basically so other cockatoos can hear them really, really, really far away. So they're very loud and they annoy everybody in Australia. But I think they're really cool and I'd love to see them in Australia. So what else do they have in common? Well, you're seeing that these cockatoos and raccoons, they seem really good at getting into bins. Well, in general, they're very good at other types of puzzles. So raccoons are great at being places that they shouldn't be. For example, in bird feeders. I like that the picture on the right actually has a preventative device that's supposed to keep squirrels and cockatoos are very similar. One of the earliest projects that was done by my supervisor, Dr. Elise Auersberg, was this multi-lock problem. Over here is a sequence of 5 locks, and they were done in different orders. So you couldn't unlock one lock until you did a different lock, and they would switch the orders. And the cockatoos did amazingly at it. And we've also given tests to cockatoos that aren't just in Austria, but in the wild in Indonesia, where we have a field station. So we know that the ones in the wild are just as smart as the ones that hang out with us. And then we've also been starting doing some work on touch screens, just like your iPad, basically, to see how well they do with puzzles like that. But the most interesting thing about cockatoos, I'll tell you a little story about a guy named Figaro. So Figaro, and most of our cockatoos, absolutely loves cashews. Okay, most of the birds would sell their mother for a cashew. They absolutely love cashews. And once upon a time, there was a cashew out of reach. And Figaro was like, all right, well, I need that. So he came up with the great idea of tearing apart the wood in our enclosure to make himself a little stick. And so he pulled it into himself and he got the cashew. And this was very exciting at the time because it's very, very rare to see an animal make tools. So we did more tests and we found out that the other cockatoos also could learn how to make tools, and they could make all sorts of different tools for different tasks. And these are all Figaro. He's kind of our star. So here he is using a piece of wood to make a stick. And inside that box, you'll see there's like a little piece of cashew that's on the platform. So he makes himself a stick out of the light wood, and then he goes over to the box. And you can see it's a little awkward for him. Like they're not meant to be able to do this. But he still succeeds in getting himself a cashew. And now he's got a stick with leaves on it. So completely different than the last material. And yet he knows that he wants a stick. So he's going to make himself a stick. Now this one's almost too small. They're pretty good, though, at judging about the exact right length they need. But he's going to have to work at this a bit. He's very persistent, though. If that sounds familiar. These cockatoos definitely don't give up easy. And there's his cashew. And here's another one with cardboard. So another completely different material. So it's not just something they just happen to know how to do. He's actually thinking, I need something that can reach. How do I make something that can reach? I really love watching them make these tools. It reminds me of using scissors, except they're using their beaks. And there you go. One fell swoop. Good job, Figaro. All right, so last but not least, something else these cockatoos and raccoons have in common. They have the right stuff. So I don't know if you noticed in that video with Roscoe, but the raccoons have something that seem almost more like hands than they do paws. And in a lot of ways, the raccoons have hands that are like primate hands. Primates meaning monkeys and apes and humans. And they even have a thumb, although unlike our thumb, which is opposable, theirs aren't. So they can't do quite as much stuff as we can. You know, they're not going to pick up a pen and write, but they're very good at manipulating things like locks compared to, say, your dog. And thank goodness that dogs aren't good at opening locks, or we'd be in big trouble. Similarly, cockatoo feet are really awesome. This is a famous cockatoo named Snowball. He's known for dancing to Michael Jackson on YouTube. And if you look at his feet, he has a type of foot that only parrots have. It's called, well, mostly only parrots have, called a zygodactyl foot. So it's like an X shape. And that X shape kind of works like an opposable thumb because they can bring things together, and they're very good at holding things, unlike, say, a songbird or a robin, that it's not going to be able to really pick things up. Whereas these cockatoos can pick up objects and turn them and pull ropes. And they also have an amazing tongue. This tongue is more like a thumb than a tongue. The things they can do with this tongue is just unbelievable. So they can turn objects inside their beak. They can take shells off. It's just fantastic. So what does it take to be a garbage bin bandit? As we discussed at the beginning, it really helps if you're really into eating a lot of different foods and if you're capable of doing a lot of different things to access those foods. You have to be able to not give up. You got to be persistent because there's lots of new things in the city, especially an animal they've never seen before and that they never were evolved to take care of. But because they stick at it, they can learn how to do anything. And of course, they need to have good equipment. They need to have the things that enable them to take advantage of their environment. So, living with these animals, what do we need to remember? We need to respect their space. You know, it's cool to admire them. I love even just looking at pigeons from a distance and just enjoying that. We have all these cool animals in our cities. But we don't want to get too close. We don't want to scare them. We don't want to stress them out. And we don't want rabies. We shouldn't feed them. Most of the food we eat, they shouldn't be eating. And like I said, they can take care of themselves. Do you want to be responsible for the raccoon apocalypse? I really hope not. And this one's really important. Don't touch their poop. Actually, as a rule, guys, I'm going to say just don't touch poop in general if you can help it. And a lesson from them, if you don't succeed, try again. And honestly, as someone who's been a student forever and who's doing their PhD, I realized it's not about being the most intelligent person. It's about being the kind of person who never gives up. So if I don't understand something, I just keep working at it. Because at the end of the day, it's the people who keep at something that get to the finish line. And I mean, that works. I can be as smart as a raccoon. That's fine by me. So my own research, as I mentioned, I'm in Austria. I've been working with the cockatoos and learning more about how they use these tools. We're learning lots and lots of new things about them. It's really incredible. And one thing I'm planning to do, hopefully if Corona ever stops, is I want to look at some of the Goffin's cockatoos that live in cities, because thanks to the bird trade, they've invaded several cities, including Singapore. And I want to see if the birds in the city are different than the birds in the country, because there's research that's been showing that it's possible that raccoons and other animals that are in the cities tend to be smarter than the ones outside of the cities. But we really don't know if that's entirely true or why that's the case. And that's why science is cool, because I get to discover all that stuff and I get to hang out with cockatoos all day. So I am really looking forward to all of your questions. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I will send it back to Jesse.
Jennifer, that was absolutely fantastic. I love looking at teachers in the background, just like having the same face of just like absolute awe at these animals doing these things. It's awesome. By the way, we should have titled this, "Do you want to be responsible for the raccoon apocalypse?" Because that would have been the greatest title of all time. Don't choke. Thank you for that. Never been said in over 1,000 broadcasts at Exploring. Let's dive in, guys. We've got 4 live classes with us, which is awesome. We've got over 100 of you on YouTube, which is amazing. So welcome in from New York, Illinois, Michigan, Ontario, and more. What we're going to do is begin with Miss Ross's class. And Miss Ross is joining us in Tavistock, Ontario, grade 4-5. If you want to kick us off with a question, come on in. Go for it.
Good morning or good afternoon, Jennifer. How are you?
Thank you. It's great. It's just the evening. I just finished some schnitzel, and I'm not joking.
Oh, lucky you.
Really eating schnitzel in Austria.
We're not having schnitzel in the morning here. I have a student.
Speak for yourself. Wait a second. That's the best breakfast. Anyway, I'll leave you to questions. Sorry.
One of my students was wondering, you said a baby raccoon is called a kit. Is there a name that you give to a group of raccoons?
That's a good question. And to be honest, there is a little bit of controversy over whether you should be calling that a kit or a cub. So my supervisor was on Team Kit, so we went with Kit. But I've seen cub and I've definitely seen pups. Raccoons are actually more related. So carnivores have two big families. There's the sort of cat family and the sort of dog family, which includes dogs and bears and things like weasels, and they're closer to the weasels. So I think you could get away with calling them any of that. As for a group of raccoons, offhand, I don't know of anything. I would personally say a banditry of raccoons, but also if you see a group of raccoons coming, they're going to mug you. So
I did my Uncle Google search, and so the first things that come up are nursery or a gaze, but I like banditry more. So if it's not the official name, it should absolutely be banditry.
We're coining it.
Welcome into classes in Toronto and in Texas, so even more classes. Geez, this has been such a fun presentation today. Miss Russett's class joining us in Arnprior. If you want to come on in and unmute that microphone, you're good to go for a question. Hi, Miss Russett.
Hopefully you can hear me because you're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah,
I had one student type in a question. He would like to know what type of biome does a cockatoo live in?
Okay. Well, I'm sure there's an official name, but they live in a monsoon rainforest. Oh, sorry. Specifically, my Goffin's cockatoos. So these cockatoos, I showed you that wide range. They actually live in a variety of biomes. So you'll see some that are in the deserts, and actually a cockatiel, like the pets you see. And to be honest, they're not very good pets. They're very loud, and you should have more than one, which means you have a lot of loud birds. They tend to live more in the deserty areas. But the ones that I have, the Goffins, they have monsoon season, which means it rains really, really, really hard, and it's very tropical and everything goes green. And then they have a dry season where there's just nothing. So I think that's why they're really adapted, because one day they can eat a coconut, and then one day they're like, oh, let's go get some bugs. And another day they go steal corns from the poor farmers. So yeah, they live in a variety, but I would say in general, most cockatoos lived in what we would consider a rainforest.
Fantastic question, guys. And by the way, again, going back to the food that they ate, I think all of us in the background were just waving like mad at everything. It's the greatest diet of all time. Miss Reed's class joining us in Huntley, Illinois. Come on in, guys. Your mic's already unmuted, so you're all set to go. Hi, Miss Reed.
All right, we have the question. Somebody wanted to know, what are some predators of the raccoon and the cockatoo?
Okay. So the cockatoo actually does depending again, depends on which cockatoos we're talking about. But the cockatoos tend to be top of the food chain in most areas because there aren't any birds of prey. However, the baby cockatoos don't do as well. And what's really bad is in Australia, they've had several invasive mammals come in. And because these birds aren't adapted to having these kind of predators, they can literally just climb up and eat the babies out of the nest hole. But once they're full size, they actually do pretty well for themselves. But humans are they're not huge fans of Goffin cockatoos stealing all the corn out of their fields. So humans can be a problem, but mostly in Australia, it's introduced predators. Raccoons is the same issue. Mostly their babies will be taken by anything, including other raccoons, I believe, will be taken by anything a little bigger. So like a fox or coyotes or something like that. And even I think cats are known to kill baby raccoons. But in general, raccoons are mesopredators, which means they're in the middle. So they have things that will prey on them, and then they prey on things under them. So the big things will get them, like wolves and things like that. But they're very good at climbing trees. So yeah, they're not horribly predated on, but humans do, and legally do in the United States. They still trap them for their fur. So again, humans are probably the worst predators.
It seems to be the case in a lot of our conservation presentations, but I can say as a Torontonian, if I saw something eating a raccoon, I'd be absolutely terrified. That would be such a weird thing to see. All of our Southern Ontario people will agree.
You're going to get those worms in your brains. I didn't think I had to say it, but don't eat raccoons.
Don't eat raccoons. Not for people, but anything eating a raccoon. Not the best. Miss Morrison's class, unmute that mic. You're joining us in Spring Arbor in Michigan, and then we're going to take a few YouTube questions before doing a second round, but we are whipping through these. This is great. Hi, Miss Morrison.
Hi. One of my kids was wondering if cockatoos can learn how to speak like parrots do.
Yeah, so it depends on the cockatoo. Ours don't speak because they're not pets. And we find that if you keep them in a big flock and they grow up with other cockatoos, that they don't learn to speak with humans. But if people do sometimes keep them as pets, you don't want them as pets. Guys, I'm serious. They live 90. There was one cockatoo that lived 100 years old. Ours only lived to like 40 or 50, but that's a long time. So please don't have them as pets. But people who do have them as pets, yeah, they can learn to talk. And in fact, we have one cockatoo that was a pet, and then the owners were like, oh, this is a bad idea. So when he was 2 years old, they gave him to our aviary. So he's the only one who was raised by humans. His name's Mookie, and he was raised by Spanish couple. So the only things he can say is hola and Mookie. But there are other cockatoos that can say a lot more. If you go on YouTube, I think there's one named Dusty who says a lot of things. There's a lot of videos of cockatoos swearing, which you shouldn't look up. But they're not the best talkers. Cockatoos are dancers. They love to dance. Our cockatoos have rhythm. There's a species of cockatoo called the palm cockatoo, and they look like Darth Maul. They're all black, and they have like these red cheek patches, and they actually take sticks, and they drum on trees, making rhythms to like show off to females, like, hey, look at my tree, look at my beats. And so you can find lots of great videos of cockatoos dancing. The best talkers are the African greys. So if you want to see good talking parrots, they're the talkers.
Yeah.
We should do a band. We'll have the singers and the dancers.
I think that would be a lot of fun. By the way, thank you for referencing Darth Maul. I really, really appreciate throwing that into a broadcast. Also the first time in our history. So we've got multiple teachers, Miss Wu in Houston and Mr. Smith in Toronto. They both want to know about this throwdown between raccoons and cockatoos. Like, who's smarter? Could a cockatoo open one of those raccoon-proof garbage bins? Like, if we had an epic battle, who would win? Jennifer, no pressure.
That's a great question. So it depends. It depends on who's got what here. So a raccoon is bigger, so it's got that advantage. And those sharp claws, really, you don't want to mess with a raccoon. But cockatoos are definitely smarter. So we've given certain tests to them on things like object permanence. And somebody recently tried to get raccoons to use tools, and they're just not on the same level as the cockatoos. But you also have to realize that cockatoos can do an aerial defense, and it's not even impossible that they could drop heavy stones. And they also have a very sharp beak. So I would definitely be in favor of the cockatoo, unless the cockatoo was on the ground. So
you're a very unpatriotic Canadian, but that's okay. That's okay. We'll let you go with that. I'll take two quick more ones from YouTube, and then we'll do our second round. So Miss Holman wants to know, what's the lifespan of a cockatoo? We already talked about this a little bit, but if you could.
Yes, quickly. Yeah. So outside of the wild, they can live anywhere between 40 to, in the case of one famous cockatoo, to like 100. So that's what a lot of people don't realize when they get parrots as pets, that even the cockatiels, like the really small ones, can live up to 30 years. So that's like basically the same commitment as a child. And people who actually own parrots have to put them in a will. So there are people to take care of them after they die, because they will probably outlive you. So they're very long-lived, and we're interested in looking at why that is. And also, one interesting thing to note is that cockatoos have a long childhood compared to other birds. A lot of birds, the birds get their feathers and they're out of the nest in sometimes like 4 to 6 weeks. And cockatoos, they depend on their parents for 6 months, and they hang around their parents for years after.
I find it so fascinating that a lot of the smartest groups of animals in the world have this long childhood, whether it's elephants, dolphins, people, apes in general. I think that's a fascinating thing. It's not just brain size. It's like how you grow up with the culture around you and learn to navigate relationships with other individuals. Is a very, very
It's related. It definitely is. Yeah.
All right. Simple one. Before we go back to our live groups, Miss Healy's class wants to know if raccoons can swim.
Yeah, raccoons are great little swimmers. And I know that there's several on some of the islands in North America that we presume they got there by swimming. And so they do a lot of fishing. There's one famous behavior with raccoons is that they do this thing, people call it hand washing their food, and they pick stuff up, they'll pick up an object and they'll put it in water, and then they'll dunk it a few more times, and people are still not entirely sure what they're doing. They're not washing the food though. And yeah, they have an amazing grip in the water. They can just sit there, and my poor uncle, he lost so many goldfish to the raccoons in his backyard. They're very good with their hands.
Anyone who's ever tried to have a backyard little fish pond in Toronto or the general Toronto area, you need to put a cage over it if you're going to have that. And it's probably not for the best, because they will get through the cage. Great questions, guys. I want to go back to our live classes. Again, this has been so much fun. We've got over, I think, 8 classes on YouTube, which is awesome. So welcome in from all across the continent. Miss Ross, if you want to come back in, take us away. Go for it.
I've had so many questions, it's hard for me to decide which one to ask. But I'm going to ask, one of my students was wondering if cockatoos and raccoons would get along with each other.
I think they would be okay. No, they wouldn't. No, because I know what raccoons would do. So cockatoos are tree nesters, which means they need to find a nice hole, usually from like a branch that's fallen out, and they take the hollow. So they don't make a nest. They just find a nice hole. And this is a huge problem in Australia. I think you've seen some of the fires, and people are chopping down trees, and then the cockatoos have nowhere to have a nest. Then to make it worse, if they were to live somewhere where they could make a hole with a nest, raccoons are baby stealers. They definitely like to climb trees, reach their hands into the hole, and baby birds, eggs. They love eggs. The ones in Toronto, they steal turtle eggs. It's a huge problem for these turtles that are endangered, because raccoons are really big egg thieves. So I don't think the cockatoos would like them very much, I'm afraid.
I like how you started out with this hopeful message, like, oh yeah, no, I really don't think so. Sorry, Ms. Ross's students. Great questions though, guys. So Miss Reed, and then we'll come to Miss Morrison to wrap us up in a second. Miss Reed, just demute that mic, and you're good to go.
All right. One of my students was asking, are there other birds and or rodents that have the same intelligence as these two?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of animals, but let's stick to birds. So the ones I know that are the smartest, there's this really cool species of parrot called the kea. They live in New Zealand. They're not related to cockatoos, and they're the only like well-known carnivorous parrot. And they're very smart. And we actually have a sister lab here that have kea, and they've done very well on maybe not as much with the tool stuff, but they're a really cool parrot. And then there's a special crow called the New Caledonian Crow. And again, same region. And they make tools. They make several different types of tools. So they were famous before the Goffins cockatoos were. There are some species of rooks that have done really well on some of these tests, jackdaws. So mostly crows and parrots, I would say, are your like super smart. Because when you get up to like eagles, they're specialists. They're really good at doing one thing, which is dropping and eating a pigeon really quickly. Like they're very good at hunting. But parrots and crows tend to be more generalists. And I think we're going to find more and more parrots and crows that can do really cool things.
My 2 favorites of all time I've ever seen in natural history documentaries. There was the crow skiing down the roof slope. So it was just grabbed a piece of wood and like sat on it and skied down and brought it back up for fun. And the one that dropped nuts underneath car tires at the stoplight in Japan and just left them. So the cars ran them over, cracked the nut for it, came and ate the nut. I mean, they're so smart. It's so cool. Animal intelligence is the best. It's like the coolest job. Jennifer has the coolest job in the world.
I really do.
This is the thing, actually, you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, sort of being in school for a very long time, and it's something that I always like to talk about in these programs, is that if you're in grade 4, the idea of going to grade 12 and then doing many years after that of school could seem daunting and kind of scary. I know it did for me when I was younger. But at the end of that, you end up really young, and you end up with an amazing job where you get to probe the mysteries of the universe and the world and explore these amazing creatures, which I think is the coolest thing ever. So if you want to end up with a job like Jennifer, it does require a little bit of extra schooling, but it's a lot of fun, and you can see that she's absurdly passionate about what she gets to do, which is
fun. And you have to remember, once you get to a certain level, it's not like you're just studying and taking tests. You get to design experiments, and you're basically an apprentice scientist. Yeah. So you've got your supervisor, and they teach you how to be a scientist, and we come up with projects together. And I got very lucky in that I've had some really good supervisors, and I having the time of my life.
We can tell. Well, that's very cool. I like apprentice scientist. That's a great term. Jennifer, we're going to wrap up with one more question. I'm going to go to Miss Morrison's class. Unmute your mic, guys, and then we'll wrap up from there. Come on in. Oh, unmute your mic. There you go. Perfect.
One of my kids is wondering if cockatoos can catch fish.
Sander, get out.
You know what? I actually have no idea that I've heard of, but I know that they would eat a fish. I'm going to go with I don't think they're adapted to, and I haven't heard of any that do, but they probably could if they needed to.
I'm trying to look it up too. If there's any record, there's nothing that jumps out. I've never seen it in anything I've ever watched in my life. Cool question, guys. See,
Yeah.
stuff to end. No worries. If we find out, you know what, our classes can do some research after the fact and see if there's ever been a recorded instance of that happening at some of the other research labs. But if anyone would know, probably Jennifer. So I think we'll say not yet, but they could if they wanted to, because they're pretty.
And to any teachers, like if you have more follow-up questions, if I'm on Twitter, you can find me at Raccoonologist and just send me a message. I'm happily answer some more questions for your classes.
I'm going to get this up, by the way. So that is the spelling of it, yes, on our banner.
Yep.
People can check that out. Jennifer's super awesome Twitter account, so do check that out as well. And guys, if you're keen to explore local biodiversity, I mean, we got the chance to see our sort of iconic animal here in Toronto, these amazing cockatoos, backyard bio all month long. Get out, explore local wildlife near you, share it and connect. We'd love to have your classes take part and connect with one another. Jennifer, this has been so much fun. Thank you for sharing your time and enthusiasm with us today. Is there any last message we want to leave classes with before they head home for the
well, I really enjoyed that. And a lot of people they're bored because they say, oh, these pigeons, these raccoons, they're all in my city. They're really interesting. Pay attention to the crows. They're watching you. They've even shown that crows can remember your faces, and most of the raccoons know who you are too. So get to know your neighbors, but respect them, give them some space. And city animals are cool.
I'm sorry, I usually do just wrap up after that. That's another one of the greatest lines in the history of a broadcast. Pay attention to the crows, they're watching you. Could have also been the title for this, and it's amazing. We've come up with 2 horror flicks in one story. Jennifer, this has been amazing. What we do at the end of every broadcast, I'm going to bring in our teachers. So Miss Ross, Miss Reed, Miss Morrison, if you guys want to join me in saying a farewell and thank you to Jennifer, you're all in. Have a wonderful day.